Hi, you're listening to Green Pulse, and I'm Nirmal Ghosh, co host along with David Fogarty. Now, as the planet warms, Himalayan glaciers are melting faster than ever before, at 3 degrees Celsius of warming, which is what we are roughly on track for under current climate policies. Glaciers in just the Eastern Himalayas, which include Nepal and Bhutan, will lose up to 75% of their ice. Now, as these glaciers melt, the water forms lakes. These new or newly enlarged lakes are a hazard as they can burst their banks and let loose all the water in flash floods downstream. We've seen this happen. Just a few months ago, in October of last year, a lake in North Sikkim breached, basically destroying a downstream dam. 33 bridges were destroyed, scores of people were killed. And that is only one aspect of one of the most fragile yet critical regions on the planet. The Himalayas are a water source for around 1.5 billion people. Today, I have with me Kunda Dixit, based in Kathmandu, where he is publisher of Nepali Times and also visiting faculty at NYU in Abu Dhabi, where he focuses on climate. And I have Dr. Bandana Shakya, who coordinates the landscapes portfolio at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, or ICIMOD, also in Kathmandu. Dr. Shakya's work ranges across biodiversity and livelihoods, and she leads ICIMOD's nature-based solutions efforts, which I hope to hear more about in a bit. Kunda, Bandana, welcome, namaste. Thank you for doing this.
Namaste.
Kunda, may I start with you? One aspect that I wanted to explore is migration, or out migration, if you will, from the mountains down to the plains. This has been going on for a long time. There are papers that have been written about the depopulation of the Himalayas. Is it gaining pace? What are the drivers? And is this out migration, in some senses, actually good for the mountain ecology in terms of forest cover recovering and so forth?
Yeah, the out migration trend is growing. It's getting more intensified, but this is happening in mountain regions all over the world. People do migrate out to cities and to the plains, but in Nepal, particularly because of the lack of jobs and opportunities, the out migration, the depopulation of some mountain districts is up to 30% in the last 10 years. And this is having repercussions throughout in everything from family relations to how the forests are coming back, actually. But that is creating another set of problems, which is the forest fires, which we saw very unprecedented this year.
Bandana, what is your perspective on this, on the vulnerabilities, the ramifications, the solutions? Is depopulation in vulnerable, high altitude ecosystems on balance a positive thing for the environment or negative? As Kunda mentioned, more forest fires, but there are also social implications. Could you unpack all that for us a bit?
Yeah, okay. Not an expert on migration, but yes, migration from the mountains to plains, from rural landscape to cities is being observed and gaining pace, I think. I think very interesting take on the depopulation of mountain landscape and reduction of risks to human life from disaster. But then migrant population are still very vulnerable in new places, aren't they? So if they are not at risk of disaster, they are from other socioeconomic adversities, right? So, and because when they migrate, I think with their low uh, safety, social safety net, and high economic challenges, there is yet another dimension on the risk to life, I think. And from an ecological perspective, if we consider socio-ecological systems such as mountain pastures, mountain farmlands, agroforestry landscapes, the impact of migration or out migration is, I think, not positive, not so positive, because these ecosystems are really shaped by human culture and society, their traditions, and their lifestyles. And although in some cases, as you said, reduced human activity in mountain areas have decreased pressure on natural resources and allowed some natural ecosystems to recover and regenerate. But there are still challenges, like Mr. Dikshit mentioned, about increasing forest fires, encroachment of invasive species, and definitely the loss of these traditional knowledge and cultural heritage. In Bhutan, for example, we are working to reinstate that practice of prescribed burning by traditional herder community in the mountain patches, which has been encroached by this invasive shrubs. So human intervention and presence are important for ecosystem that are linked or shaped by people's culture and tradition. And just additional point that while migration from marginal mountain areas may reduce the immediate risk to human life from disaster, it's important for us to consider how we can address the underlying drivers of migration, including environment degradation, disaster risk, and climate change impacts.
Um, yeah, in the Himalaya, all the media attention seems to be on ice and snow. It's very visible, it's right up there, and you can compare before and after pictures. But what we forget is the water inside the mountains, and also the sky rivers. So water in all its forms, the water vapor that comes in clouds, the rain and snow that falls on these mountains, and then the groundwater inside. So the phenomenon that we have seen in the past several years is that springs across the Himalaya are going dry, and this is feeding the whole out migration as well. Many farmers we've interviewed in the Himalaya in Nepal have said that if there was only more water, if the springs had not gone dry, they would not have migrated.
Right. Okay. So, staying with you, Kunda, for the moment on the broader issue of resilience, how resilient is Nepal's infrastructure, including hydroelectric power projects and so forth, in terms of being equipped to adapting to what is possibly in store?
Nepal is extremely vulnerable to climate related disasters, as we have seen in the past. You mentioned the Sikkim floods last year. We had a very similar one 2 years ago, but not on it. It almost destroyed our most expensive infrastructure project, which was a water supply project that supplies water through a 26-kilometer tunnel from a glacier-fed river to Kathmandu Valley. And that flood, wiped out the headworks. Luckily, the tunnel could be saved. We have had similar floods to the one in Sikkim on this side of Kanchenjunga in the Arun Basin last year. There have been similar floods elsewhere, both related to glacial lake outbursts, but also landslide dammed rivers. And the frequency of these disasters is going to get worse. And I think Nepal as a country is not really prepared for the scale at which some of these disasters are going to happen in future.
Bandana, switching to you, is there adequate data sharing between the countries that share the Himalayan region? Is there any semblance of a collective consciousness and mobilization, strategic coordination, given that the water is shared by many millions across state and national boundaries?
I think on this point, this is really a critical point on sharing of data, but this is where things are not really adequately happening. Of course, there are common agenda. These are a common agenda, but still it's very difficult for countries to really share or provide that information. But from ECMOD's perspective as a regional institutions, we are trying to bring together countries to talk about the scientific resources, to bring together, at least from the scientific point of view, the information and data on these water resources and disasters, and at least talk about them and discuss through regional assessment there. But I think before, may I also, spring is one of the important interventions for us. And could I touch base a little bit from the nature-based solution
Yeah,
perspective
I'm going to, that
on?
was my next question to you actually. Tell us a little bit
Okay,
about your
okay.
nature-based solutions. You've done a lot of work on that, on food security and so forth. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I recently visited one municipality in Nepal, and where we are implementing our spring revival intervention, another of our nature-based solution for water insecurity. And there, when you talk to community, they talk about very less rain, erratic rains, and practically no winter rains. And they also indicated that volume of water in streams are really getting low. So some of the villages around the watersheds, therefore, were very empty and deserted. A lot of out migration, and actually, it's very hard for the communities dependent on agriculture and livestock to deal with such climate and non-climatic pressures, and it's hard for their lives and livelihoods. And our measures, let me talk about a brief about our measures on spring revival. And we are using this multifaceted approach. We are promoting this low cost soil water interventions. For example, the idea is just to increase water filtration and to recharge the groundwater that really feeds the spring. So something like simple technologies like construction of trenches and terraces to slow down surfaces, which even the community can do it by themselves. For example, building check dams and gabions in streams and gullies. So additionally, we are also looking into forest and watershed management, because land use and land cover change is also another major driver of change affecting this water stress. So we are trying also looking into rainwater harvesting technology, scientific monitoring and research, and also community engagement and participation, where we are really seriously considering gender equality and social inclusion, because water is also very related to social inclusion here in Nepal and across mountains and and elsewhere. I think this is the beauty of nature-based solutions, where we really try to unpack the challenges, the root causes of it, not just the surface intervention, the root causes, the implications into environment, implications into socio cultural setup. And this is really about not bringing the solution from outside, but co-designing it with the community, looking at their capacity, and also bringing uh, local government into the picture, so as to make it more sustainable and to lure governments to support the community and the intervention. So it's basically co-designing the solutions with them, and so that there's early ownership and buy-in and sustainability of the solution. And this is basically the design element of nature-based solution.
In- That is, that's really interesting. Kunda, your thoughts on that, on indigenous knowledge, nature-based solutions, and so forth?
Yeah, what we've observed in our reporting about climate impact in the mountains is that people are adapting without even knowing what they're adapting to, which means they're building trails higher and higher. The bridges are going up. Gabion walls are being built. So, Himalayan peoples have always adapted to droughts and floods and landslides. It's nothing new. It's just that the intensity of it and the frequency is got higher. So let's just go back to one more point about transborder, if I
Right.
may. The Himalaya is a hotspot in more ways than one. It's a hotspot because of the climate crisis, but it's also a hotspot geopolitically. And this is where the role of organizations like Bandhana's ISIMOD comes in, because it's the only organization that works across national boundaries on some of these issues. And Nirmal, you talked about data sharing. Data sharing is one aspect, hydrological data, even historical data about really large floods in the past, so we can prepare for them in future. But one critical aspect now, which is being felt, is early warning, especially if a river, for example, in Tibet, a glacial lake bursts in Tibet, and the river is a tributary of a river that flows into Nepal and then through Nepal into India. Then there really needs to be an early warning system so that we are prepared when that does happen. And we saw in several rivers in the past 5 years that there have been transboundary floods, and early warning would have saved some lives. But then the destruction to infrastructure could not be averted, of course.
So that early warning system doesn't exist at the moment, or it could be improved.
I don't think that it is working because, as I was saying, the Himalaya is also a geopolitical hotspot, so countries are not really talking to each other. The world's highest battlefield is between India and Pakistan in the Siachen Glacier. India and China are often coming to blows along the Himalayan frontier. So, because it's such a tense region, hydrological data or even data on rivers and glaciers tends to be a military secret. So people don't want to share it. But then there are countries like Nepal or Bhutan where it could happen because there is no real tension between, let's say, China and Nepal or other countries, or China and Pakistan. So there would be room for early warning systems to be in place. I know that ISIMOD is trying to get the dialogue going between governments so that there is better warning systems in place.
Yeah.
But I think for that, you need to have better cooperation between the countries.
I think it's also about the pace. Some very good practices, good examples are happening on community based early warning systems, uh, but it needs to be scaled up. It needs to be linked to the broader national information sharing, and then obviously at the regional scale. Just want to touch base on how ISIMOD is taking up this role as a convener, and ISIMOD, being the intergovernmental agency, yes, in a very, very geopolitically sensitive landscape, working across the 18th Himalayan region. Regional cooperation is really our strength. And I think regional cooperation is actually a must when our issues are really shared. This climate change, whether it's a climate change risk, whether it's disaster risk reduction, whether it's a biodiversity loss crisis. So, ISIMOD, in its current programmatic portfolio, has these two dedicated work areas that fosters regional cooperation and global collaboration. We have this regional database that takes care of data and information sharing. For example, the regional flood information sharing system, which kind of shares real time flood related data and information wherever available. Like, government needs to provide this information, and because we pull it from the government, so wherever available, these are the resources that we could use across. And we also do thematic assessment. Sometimes the scientific collaboration is much more easier than the political collaboration. So we do use such thematic assessments, such as Hindu Himalayan monitoring and assessment program. Through such assessments, we try to bring scientists and practitioners together to put the data and information for Himalayas, and try to build that shared understanding of the changes that are happening, the urgency of these changes, and to inform the policies, and how we can work together and collaborate, for example, for data sharing. Our recent report on water, ice, and society and ecosystem, which we call Highwise report, also provides that collective regional outlook on what implications or the changes in snow and ice have on water ecosystems and societies, and there is good elaboration on why transboundary cooperation is needed and what are the transboundary implications of these issues. Uh, And yes, regional cooperation is also important for us to generate that one voice on mountain vulnerability in global platforms, such as the Conference of Parties for UNFCCC or UNSCBD. This is important to put forward our arguments on why mountain resilience matters.
Gunda, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that broadly speaking, the crisis in the Himalayas is about water, right? It's a water crisis. The climate crisis, in fact, is a water crisis. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about water. You need it for plants to grow, for food to grow, for forests to grow. You need it for the springs. You need it for the rivers. And there are different aspects of it, of course. The glaciers are feeding the rivers, which flow down into, and, for 1.5 billion people downstream. So it's not just a Nepal or a Himalaya crisis. It's a crisis for half of Asia. But the other side of it is the local water. So if you can provide water, either through irrigation, through pumps, through solar pumps that can just pump water out of the river to the fields above it. It's not that there is no water. There's plenty of water. It's just that it's not there where it's needed. And this makes farmers who are already very vulnerable to, because they were depending on rain-fed agriculture, makes them even more vulnerable with the climate crisis and erratic rainfalls. So if you can provide water through wells, through springs, through groundwater recharge, then you have solved half the problem, because people then can start growing food. It might even be the answer to outmigration, partly. I think government should, if there's a low hanging fruit here, it's water, and we know that it is going to get more and more difficult in the dry season as the glaciers melt and as the permafrost melts. So it's the Himalayan ice cap is critical for the rest of Asia, but then we need those local solutions that Dr. Bandana also mentioned, where ISIMOD is also working very effectively with local communities to build that resilience that comes through, adequate water supply.
Okay, really interesting. Kunda, last question to you. You have been writing on climate change for decades, like some of us older guys. And I remember you run a major newspaper, and I remember you wrote a book some years ago, Dateline Earth: Journalism as if the Planet Matters. Do you think journalism is now practiced as if the planet matters? Do you think any progress has been made?
Yeah, it's very frustrating for us older journalists, as you said, who have been writing on climate, for example, even before it became a mainstream discourse. But I work mainly with media. So besides our own paper, I also work with students who are aspiring journalists. And one major concern now is actually something called climate despair and climate anxiety among younger people. They're bombarded by all these really, really apocalyptic predictions of what's happening to the planet and to our mountains. And they sort of tend to give up. So we really need to change the focus of how the media operates as well, to give hope, to provide solutions. And there are plenty of solutions. There are plenty of things going right. But because of the way media functions, we tend to go for the more negative, more sensational aspects. So, for example, even along in the mountains in Nepal, there are farmers who are building resilience by themselves, as Bandana mentioned, with a little bit of help from outside. They are trying to recharge their aquifers by reviving the traditional ponds that used to be right across the mountains. But ultimately, Nirmal, it boils down to governance. And governments, politicians, elected officials need to know what is happening and prepare for it. We tend to blame now everything on climate change and the climate crisis, even stuff that's not really related to the climate crisis. It's a very convenient excuse for governments to say, "Oh, that's because of the climate." Food security, "Oh, that's because of climate." Whereas it has actually been a failure of governance that has led to large parts of the Himalayan region being food deficits. So the media really needs to tread carefully here, not to be, panic mongering, but be offering solutions.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I actually hosted a podcast. Green Pulse actually looked at this. I think it was sometime last year about climate anxiety. It was a very interesting aspect of it and the media's role in this. Thank you very much, Dr. Bandana Shakya, Kunda Dixit. Thank you. That was fascinating indeed. Good luck and take care out there in your mountains. Namaste.
Thank you for this
Namaste.
opportunity. Thank you.
That wraps it up for Green Pulse. Once again, I am Nirmal Ghosh. Thanks for listening.